My friends, today we're going to be going over place value and rounding. Now, what's the importance of this lesson? Well, on the first 5 questions on the GED, you might be just given a question to round a number. So obviously you need to know how to round in order to answer those straightforward questions that you might come across on the first 5 questions of the GED that you're not allowed to use the calculator on. But even on the more advanced, on part 2 of the math test, where they give you a lot more challenging questions because you're allowed to use the calculator, rounding is still going to be utilized in those questions. You might, once we get into algebra, you're going to be doing all the math of algebra, this and that, and you're going to be coming up with an answer. Your calculator will give you an answer. But on the multiple choice options on the GED, you won't see that number exactly on that you got from the calculator. And that's because the GED provides always rounded answers. So we need to know how to round. The first thing we need to learn in order to round is something called place value. So we need to memorize our place value. I don't like telling students to memorize stuff, but it's going to be one of those cases in which you just need to memorize. You need to go through your note cards, your notes, and always try to memorize. Kind of like mean, medium, mode, and range. It's just stuff you need to memorize. If you have bad memory, this is going to be tough, y'all, but you need to practice. So let's look at this example here. I wrote a number 23,462.4596. We're going to learn the place values of both the whole number side and the decimal side. We're going to do this all in one, so this video might be a little long, but just go through it all with me. Just a quick little note. Let's say you weren't given a decimal number. Let's say we're just given a whole number like 23,462. Always know, you might know this, but always know there is an invisible decimal spot there. There's always a decimal point right behind the last number, all right, or the first number, whatever way you want to look at it. But there's always an invisible decimal there, and if you don't see any numbers, that's because it has an infinite amount of zeros, right? That's why it's all hidden from us, is because to not make it look complicated to us, they just delete all the zeros and delete even the decimal spot for us, the decimal point. But that's kind of important to know in case you're given the question later on that I might give you an example of. But in this example, we're going to actually see the decimals. We're going to see the decimal point and we're going to see the decimal numbers for our first example. So you need to memorize the place values. The first place value that's important, which is why I just went over this whole little hidden decimal, is this spot right there, the last number. The last number, if again you're given a whole number, it's your last number. If you're given a decimal, it's the number in front of the decimal point. That, my friend, I like to call the anchor point. All right, it is called your ones place. So when they tell you to round to the nearest ones, well, we'll get into how to round, but the first thing you should have in mind is the ones place. Where's that at? It's the last number of the whole side of the whole number section, or the number to the left of the decimal spot that's snuggled up right next to the decimal point. That, my friends, is the ones place. Okay. The reason why I call this an anchor point is because there's only one of those. Get it? The ones place, there's only one. That's the only one place. That's the where the line is drawn. From then on, everything to the left, everything to the right is just a mirrored reflection of each other, just with a small little difference in writing. So if we look at the number next to the ones place, to the left of it, that, my friends, is your tens. Now, why did I just mention a mirrored reflection? Everything from that anchor point, from the ones place, is because if you look to the right of the 2, which is the 4, the number 4, this is your tenths spot. This is your tenths value. This is what I mean by the mirrored reflection. Tens, tenths, they're almost identical. The only difference is a small little difference in writing. The decimal sections always have a TH at the end of it. THS. The th, right? So when they tell you round to the nearest tens, that means you got to go to the 6, for example. If they tell you round to the nearest tenths, that means you got to go to the 4, which is the 10th spot. A little brain fart moment. So the ones is the anchor point. From there on, everything to the left, everything to the right is almost the same with each other, just with the little difference in writings. For example, the 6 is the 10th, the 4 is the 10ths. If we continue on, this spot right here, this other 4, this is going to be your hundreds. If you look at the 5, what do you think it is? Any guesses? Yes, you know. The hundredths. Because like I said, it's a mirrored reflection. If this is your line, if this is your anchor point right here, that number is going to match that one. Tens, tenths. This 4 is going to match that one. Hundredths, hundredths. If I tell you this 3 right here, that spot is the thousands. What do you think this 9 is? The thousandths. Thousandths. And then we move on. This 2 here is the 10,000s. Oopsie. And what do you think the 6 is? It's the 10,000ths with the TH. Okay? That's the example of my number. That's all the place value, but the place values continue on. In the worksheet, you do have this right here. We stopped with my example over here at the 10,000s, but the number next to it would be 100,000s and then the millions. All right. This example doesn't give you a decimal, so you don't see the decimal side, but like I said, we'll get to that in a sec. But in my example, it ended with the 10,000s on both sides, believe it or not. But let's say I were to add another number here, like a 5. Again, just like the worksheet shows you, this is your 100,000s. Let's say I wrote a number here. It would be the 100,000ths with the TH. You get the idea with the decimal side. It's just going to continue on the opposite of the whole number side, but with TH at the end. Obviously here, let's say we wrote a 2, that would be your millions place value. And it just continues on. It would be the 10 millions, the 100 millions, and then the billions, and then continue on. But I don't want to give you guys too much to think about in this first example. We're just gonna stick with my example of the 23,462.4596. all right, you guys now know your place values. You guys should memorize this place value. Again, the ones is always your anchor point. It's always just, there's only one spot for it, the ones. And then from then on, it goes tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions. And then on the opposite side, and the decimal side, it's the same thing, just with TH. The tenths, hundredths, thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, millions, 10 millionths. It just all continues. You guys got to memorize this. If you don't, I don't feel bad for y'all. Y'all didn't study. So please study. Now we get into rounding. Now we're gonna come back to my example, my long, big 23,462.4596 number example, but we're just gonna stick with simple ones for now for the rounding process. Let's say we're given 462. Well, let's stick with the whole number first. The way a question is gonna look like on the GD is like this: round the following number, and I obviously give you the number right there, to the nearest tenths. This is why you got to memorize your place values, because the way to round is when the question tells you round your answer or round the number to the nearest tenths, Well, I said TH, didn't I? My bad. If the question says round your answer to the nearest tens, because there is no tenths here, there's no TH because there's no other number, right? My bad about that. The question in this example is going to look like round the following answer or number 462 to the nearest tens. To the nearest tens. Okay. The reason why I made you all memorize the place value is because in order to round, you need to know where the tens spot is. Go to your tens. Where's the tens? Well, if we know my last number next to the little decimal spot, because you know there's always a hidden decimal spot there. If you know that's your ones, you can start from there, and you know tens. Well, I found my tens spot. It's right there. It's the 6. That's step 1 of rounding. Step number 2 to rounding, here comes the complicated part. We must, when we go to our place value, look to the number right next to it, to the right of it. All right, it's a little next door neighbor. What we do now, my friends, is we focus on that number, the number right behind the value that they're telling us to round. That 2, I must ask myself something. One of 2 rules. This is the only one. There's only 1 or 2 rules that y'all must ever know. The 1 to 4 rule or the 5 to 9 rule. All right. So the 1 to 4 rule, that is a rule that says if this next door neighbor number, this one right here, next to the 10 spot, which is what the question is telling me to round, the tens spot, if that number, the next door neighbor number, is 1 to 4, your whole overall answer, or everything to the right of your place value, is going to stay the same. And if your next door neighbor number fell between 5 and 9, it means your number is gonna increase by 1. Well, what are you talking about here? This is all confusing. Well, this is what I mean. Just focus on the rules. So we went to our 10 spot, which is a 6. We looked to the neighbor to the right. It was a 2. So I asked myself, 2, what rule does it fall under? Does it fall under the 1 to 4 or the 5 to 9? Well, obviously it falls under the 1 to 4, which means because obviously 1, 2, 3, 4, it obviously falls in between. That means my answer is going to stay the same. What does that stay the same mean? That means if we go back here, we're going to rewrite this. We're going to round it to the nearest tens. We're going to write it all the same. For the 10 spot stays the same, 6. And then everything to the right of the number gets converted to 0. 462 rounded to the nearest tens is 460. All right? Complicated, I know. Let's look at another example, just so you guys can get it. If we look at 5, 3, 6, 1. Okay, and I'm told, let's say I'm told to round this to the nearest hundreds. Round 5,361 to the nearest hundreds. What did I tell you to do? Go to that place value. Go to your hundreds. What's your hundreds? Well, my hundreds is the 3. That's my hundredths place value. Look to its neighbor to the right. It's a 6. The 6. What rule does it fall under? If you forgot our rule, let's come back here. Does it fall under my 1 to 4 or my 5 to 9? Well, it's a 6, so obviously it falls under my 5 to 9 rule, right? It's in between 5 and 9, which means my place value, the 100 spot, needs to increase by 1. So this 3, that's the 100 spot. I check this neighbor to the right. It's a 6, which means I come back here and this 3, this 100 spot, it doesn't stay the same because that would have been my 1 to 4 rule. The 5 to 9 rule tells me that the 100 spot needs to increase by 1, which means this 3 gets converted to a 4. And just like before, everything to the right after that place value just turns to 0. 5,361 is 5,400. Rounded to the nearest hundreds, obviously. Go to the place value. Look to the neighbor to the right. Ask yourself, that next door neighbor number, does it fall under my 1 to 4 or the 5 to 9? Based off of the rule, go back to the place value and do what's necessary. It either stays the same or it increases. So this is an example of an increase. We already went over an example of a decrease, but let's go over another example of a decrease. Let's say this was 5,341. The only thing difference in this one is the tens spot. So, but the same thing, we're going to round this answer to the nearest hundreds. So go to your hundreds, 3. Look to the neighbor to the right. It's a 4. Does it fall under my 1 to 4 or my 5 to 9? It falls under my 1 to 4, which means if I go back to the 100 spot, my rule tells me, because of the 1 to 4 rule, that this 3 needs to stay the same, which means it's 5, 3, and then everything turns to 0 after that. The only hard part I feel for students is always that whole, what turns to 0? Is it everything before or after? What? It's just everything to the right of your place value that they're telling you to round to. Remember, the question is going to be what tells you to round. They tell you round to the nearest tens, round to the nearest hundreds, round to the nearest thousands. Everything to the right of that place value turns to 0 after you do your little calculation of whether it's going to stay the same or if it's going to increase by 1. Okay. That's rounding, and you could take that along with you to the decimal spot. So if we look at our example here, 23,462.4596. Let's say the question was telling me to round this whole big number to the nearest hundredths. Did you notice the question had a TH on the place value? If they tell you round 23,462.4596 to the nearest hundreds, if you don't see a TH, you'd be rounding this number there. But because the question had a TH, round this number to the nearest hundredths, we have to go to this one here. That's the hundredths, the TH. So let's round this to the nearest hundredths. How about that? Let's do that. It's the same rule. Oopsie. Let's not erase my rule. Let's just erase this to make room. So we're going to round 23,462.4596 to the nearest hundredths. You go to your hundredths, the 5. You look to the neighbor to the right. That 9. What rule does it fall under? The 1 to 4 or the 5 to 9? It falls under the 5 to 9, which means my hundredths needs to increase by 1. Which means this hundredth spot needs to increase by 1, which means 23,462.4, and there's my hundredth spot. I'm going to increase it by 1, 6, and then the rest becomes 0. All right. Now, chances are on the GD you won't be seeing zeros, because whenever there's a 0 after the decimal spot, so if after this decimal spot, that direction to the right of the decimal, if you're at the end of your actual numbers, the GD will not give you any more zeros, even though in this case that 9 is 6 gets converted to 0 just like before. On the GD you won't see those zeros because they like to erase any numbers that end with zeros. But you're not wrong, especially on my worksheet, if you put 0. That's the correct answer, honestly. But this is how you round on the decimal side. Is the same thing. There's nothing hard about this, folks. Now comes the tricks. This is what makes me special. This is what makes me a good GED instructor, is the tricks that I teach y'all. I teach y'all tricks to prep you for how the GED might give you questions. So let's say we're given this right here. 42 point, let's say 298. Okay, 42.298. So I want you to round this number to the nearest hundredths. TH, my friend, which means the 100th spot is right here. Remember, memorize your place values. Again, this is your ones place, which means this is my tens, this is my tenths. This number would be my hundredths, whatever number it would have been, which means my 9 is my hundredths. Did I say that twice? This number, whatever it would have been my hundreds, and the 9 would have been my hundredths, is my hundredths. So that's what you got to keep on doing. You guys got to master your place values. So round this answer to the nearest hundredths. I go to the 9. That's my hundredths. And you do what you do best. Look to the number to the right. It's an 8. It falls under my 1 and 9 rule, which means if I go back to my hundredth spot, I must increase it by 1. What? Increase it by 1, but it's a 9. What? Am I supposed to erase this somehow and put a little 10 in between? I don't get it, Neon. What's 9 plus 1 would be 10. How do I fit in 1? That's the first trick, my friends, is the infamous 9. If in case you have this situation where the number that you're rounding is a 9, if you increase it by 1, what it technically does is jump over to the next one. The number to the left ends up getting the boost up to the 3. Everything to the left stays the same, and everything to the right, what happens? Gets converted to 0. So you'd be having the answer 42.300, or on how the GED will present it to you is just 42.3. But you're not wrong if on the worksheet you put zeros. It's all the same thing, just prepping you on how the GED might look like. But that is the 9, my friends. The 9s, if you're increasing it by 1, has to jump to the number to the left. One last trick, which still involves the 9, is let's say we're given 5. I don't know. Let's say we're given 9, 8, 6, 2, 1.42. Doesn't matter. Okay. Let's round 98,621.42 to the nearest 10,000s. Okay, where's the 10,000 spot? The 10,000 spot is the 9 right there. Again, memorize your place values to know exactly where to go to. Look to the neighbor to the right. It's an 8. Falls under my my 5 to 9 rule, which means if I go back to my place value, it increases by 1. We just went over this. It's a 9. If it gets increased by 1, it should jump to the number to the left. Oh, wait a minute. There is no number to the left. What do we do? Well, here, we know there's an invisible 0. I did say this earlier. Not only do you have an infinite amount of zeros on the decimal side, but you have an infinite amount of zeros in front. So take advantage of that, my friends. If you know there's a 0 there, 0, increase it by 1. And what do we get? What we end up getting is 1, and then everything else becomes 0. Weird trick, I know, but you guys got it. This is everything you need to know about place values and rounding. I really highly suggest you memorize your place values as priority number 1. And then look over this video multiple times. Look at other videos on YouTube if need be, in order to master the whole rounding method. Because there are other methods. I like the whole 1 to 4 and the 5 to 9 rule. You guys tell me which ones you prefer. And if you need help with anything, let me know, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next one.